My name is Claire Halston, and I'm 38 years old. I never thought the hardest goodbye would happen at my own sister's wedding unspoken, right there in front of 100 smiling guests. I gave my name to the staff. They scanned the list, then looked at each other. Sorry, you're not on here. Confused, I turned toward my mother. She didn't even flinch. Did you really think this day was about you? She said, barely hiding her smirk. I nodded slowly. No, not anymore. And I walked away, heels clicking against the marble floor, heart heavier than ever. Before I take you into what led to that moment, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments, give this a like, and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. This one's for all of us who learn to walk away not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I grew up in a modest 2-story home just outside Eugene, Oregon. We weren't rich, but we had enough. My father, David Halston, believed in hard work and quiet evenings. My mother, Patricia, believed in appearances and maintaining them at all costs. From the outside, we looked like any typical middle-class family: 2 daughters, a golden retriever, a yard full of hydrangeas. But if you stepped just a little closer, you'd notice something off, like a portrait that seems lovely until you realize the subject isn't smiling with her eyes. My younger sister, Ava, was the golden child. Pretty, charming, always knew the right thing to say. People gravitated toward her like moths to warm porch light. She won homecoming queen, got a full scholarship, brought home boyfriends who knew how to win over our parents in under 5 minutes. I didn't. I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who figured out how to pay for her own college when the family fund mysteriously dried up. The one who didn't crash her car, didn't lie about test scores, didn't accidentally book a week-long girls' trip on the same weekend as her cousin's wedding. But Ava's mistakes were framed as growth. Mine, they were disappointments. Still, I never made a fuss. That was the rule in our house. Keep the peace, smile for the pictures, and whatever you do, don't make things awkward. So I folded myself small. I became what they needed me to be: available, dependable, invisible. I remember once, in my early 20s, sitting at the kitchen table with my dad. It was late. He was nursing a glass of scotch, flipping through some tax documents. I had just landed my first job out of college, and I was proud. I told him about it, how I'd negotiated a starting salary $8,000 higher than what they offered. I thought he'd be impressed. He looked up and said, "That's great, Claire, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Maybe don't mention it to Ava, she's still figuring things out. No, well done, no, I'm proud of you. Just a reminder to shrink so my sister could shine." And that's how it always was. Birthdays, holidays, even funerals. Somehow Ava's needs came first. I was the family's problem solver, but never their pride. I paid for things quietly, covered gaps in rent, fixed a leak in my parents' roof without anyone ever asking. When Mom needed help organizing her backyard bridal shower for Ava, I took the week off work, stayed up till 3 a.m. designing centerpieces, baking cupcakes, and cleaning the deck. And when guests asked who the event planner was, Mom smiled and said, "Oh, just someone we hired online." I smiled too, and stayed quiet, because silence was easier than the look Mom gave me when I made things about myself. Because silence kept me invited, and for a long time I thought being invited meant I belonged. But it's funny what clarity comes when you're standing outside your sister's wedding, your name absent from the list, your mother watching you unravel with a smirk on her face. It didn't happen overnight, but that moment, that was the break. The moment where everything that had been quietly building for 30-some years snapped into focus. That's what I want to tell you about, the things you don't see in family photo albums, the conversations that happen after guests leave, the way a person can be erased, not with cruelty, but with soft indifference, and the way you wake up one day, heart bruised and bones tired, and finally ask the question no one wants you to ask. What if I just stopped showing up? I wasn't always sure when it started, this slow, quiet shift from being a daughter to becoming a distant fixture. Not hated, just background. Take family dinners. My mother loved hosting. Perfect table settings, linen napkins, classical music humming in the background like a polite whisper. Everyone dressed up as if Martha Stewart might drop in. Ava would walk in 20 minutes late, toss her purse on the sideboard, kiss everyone on the cheek like a politician, and suddenly the evening revolved around her. Her new job, her new boyfriend, her new skincare routine. I once tried to talk about a deal I'd just closed at work. My father nodded, then turned to Ava and said, "Sweetheart, didn't you just start using vitamin C serum? Tell us about that." I stared down at my plate. Chicken breast, wild rice, steamed broccoli. Bland, safe, polite. Just like me. Even in family photos, I noticed it. At Ava's graduation, I stood to the left, half cut off by the edge of the frame. In a group picture at Thanksgiving, my cousin tagged everyone on Facebook. Except me. I wasn't even cropped out. I just wasn't mentioned. And at every gathering, there was that one moment. A toast. A comment, a subtle jab, like the time Uncle Ray clinked his glass at a barbecue and said, "To Ava, making the family proud as always." Then he turned to me and added, "And Claire, thank you for bringing the deviled eggs." Laughter, polite applause. I smiled, raised my drink, and swallowed the sting. It wasn't that I wasn't loved. I was useful. I was helpful. But love, the kind that sees you, really sees you, that was reserved for someone shinier. Once I showed up at my mother's birthday brunch with a hand-wrapped book she'd been hunting for in a rare edition. She thanked me, set it aside, and spent the next 20 minutes opening a scented candle Ava had bought at a mall kiosk. "This is just so thoughtful," she said, holding it to her chest like it was a sacred heirloom. I began to learn that there were two versions of our family. The one we performed for the world, and the one that existed when no one was watching. The performance was flawless. Coordinated outfits, smiles wide and white, Instagram captions full of #blessed, but behind closed doors there were unreturned calls, forgotten birthdays, promises left hanging, and always the unspoken hierarchy. Ava glittered at the center. I orbited quietly, a satellite in pressed slacks and practical shoes, paying bills no one acknowledged and biting my tongue more times than I could count. I used to think if I kept being useful, they'd notice. That one day my mom would take me aside, look me in the eye, and say, "Claire, I see you. I appreciate you. I love you not for what you do, but for who you are." She never did. Instead, I became a guest star in my own family. I showed up on cue, smiled when expected, gave generous gifts, and accepted less than crumbs in return. It's funny. You don't realize how lonely you've become until you're sitting at a table full of people who know your name but haven't asked how you're really doing in years. One night, after a particularly draining family dinner, I got home, kicked off my heels, and stood in the kitchen, still holding the half-empty bottle of Pinot Grigio I brought to Mom's. The lights buzzed faintly. The silence pressed in. I poured a glass, leaned on the counter, and whispered something I didn't even know I was carrying. "This can't be love." And for the first time in my adult life, I started to wonder, what would it look like to stop performing? To stop being the one who always came through, always stepped aside, always swallowed the hard parts? That question would sit with me for months, growing louder, heavier, until one day it would be impossible to ignore. But not yet. Not that night. That night I finished my wine, turned off the lights, and went to bed like always, still hoping they'd see me. If you looked at my bank statements over the past 10 years, you'd see a trail of silent emergencies. 200 here to fix Ava's flat tire. 700 there for Mom's dental surgery. A monthly auto transfer labeled Mom Rent that had been going out for so long, I stopped noticing it. Another labeled Uncle Rick Phone Plus Meds. A $1,000 vet bill for Ava's dog, who once bit me but still somehow had me listed as his emergency contact. None of it was ever formally asked for. That's the thing. In my family, help was expected, not requested. Mom would sigh over the phone. "I don't know how we're going to cover this month's rent. Things are so tight since your father passed." Then silence, not a question, just air heavy with assumption. And I'd fill it, every time. Ava would call, crying about how Mason's job got cut, or how her dog needed another surgery, or how we're just drowning over here. And I'd send money before she finished the sentence. No one ever said thank you. Not really. I think they thought the thank you was built into my role. "You're the one who has her life together, Claire. You make more than us. You don't have a family of your own, so you wouldn't understand what it's like." They made it sound like I was lucky to have so little to spend on myself. One Christmas, Ava gave me a framed photo of her and Mason on a trip I paid for, a glossy reminder of my own generosity, wrapped with a silver bow. She wrote on the back, "We couldn't have made these memories without you." She meant it, but not the way I needed. That was the pattern. I paid and they lived. I solved and they celebrated. I gave and they grew. And I worked late, worked weekends, took consulting contracts on top of my full-time job, told friends I was too busy to go out, skipped vacations, let my own dreams take a number, and wait at the back of the line. All because I thought it meant something. That someday, when it mattered, they'd be there for me the way I had always been there for them. But slowly, things started to shift. Ava stopped replying to my texts unless she needed something. Mom began talking to me like a tenant, not a daughter. Uncle Rick forgot my birthday 3 years in a row, until I reminded him when his pharmacy account needed topping up. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was tired, or just going through a phase. But then, one day, I saw Ava's Instagram story. She was at a new sushi place, posting clinking glasses, glowing selfies, hashtags like #selfcare and #blessed. It was the same day she told me she couldn't repay that $600 loan I'd floated her to cover emergency groceries. I watched her tip champagne into her boyfriend's mouth on screen and felt something in me tighten. Not rage, not even hurt, just something beginning to rise. That night, I sat down with my laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet. I titled it, Contributions. It wasn't about the money. It was about the math of it all. The imbalance. The weight I carried for people who never offered to carry me back. When I finished tallying it up, every transfer, every favor, every unpaid loan, it totaled just under $137,000. That's when I started to cry. Not because I wanted it back, but because for the first time in years I had to face the fact that love, in my family, had become a currency. And I was the only one footing the bill. There was a time when I could power through exhaustion, when I thought burnout was just a tax you paid for being dependable. I used to joke that I could run on coffee and guilt, but at some point the caffeine stopped working, and the guilt just started to rot. Work, which used to feel like an anchor, began to feel like a hiding place. It was the one space where my contributions had receipts, performance reviews, bonuses, actual thank you emails. A client once sent me a handwritten note after I helped salvage a late shipment during Christmas season. I kept that card on my fridge for 3 years. No one in my family ever wrote me a thank you note. At home, I was always on edge. One missed call from Mom and I'd spiral, wondering what bill had bounced or which appliance was now broken. When Ava's name lit up my screen, I didn't feel warmth. I felt dread. It was never just, "Hey, how are you?" It was, "Hey, do you have a second?" Which meant, "Can you fix this for me?" Even my weekends didn't feel like mine anymore. Saturdays blurred into bank transfers and research for Mom's insurance. Sundays became food deliveries to Ava's place when she was too tired to cook and Mason was working on his side hustle. They always said it like that, his side hustle. Not jobless, not living off Ava, but entrepreneurial. Meanwhile, I was skipping lunch to cover client calls from multiple time zones, lying awake at night thinking about contingency plans for other people's lives. And yet, somehow, I was the one labeled cold. Too serious. Emotionally distant. Mom once said, "You're just not warm the way Ava is. People feel safer with her." That one hurt, not because it was cruel, but because it landed in a place I had tried to ignore my whole life. I wanted to be the safe one. I was the safe one. But people don't notice safe. They lean on it. They rely on it. And eventually they forget it's even holding them up. I didn't complain, I didn't cry, I didn't even push back. I just started keeping score, not on paper, not yet, but in little invisible tallies. Every time I stayed late at work to fix something I didn't break. Every time I canceled dinner with friends because Ava was having a meltdown. Every time I bit my tongue when Mom made a snide remark about my empty apartment life. One night, I came home to find my kitchen sink leaking, water pooling beneath the cabinets. I texted the plumber I used for Mom last spring and scheduled him for the next day. Then I sat on the floor and laughed. Because in all the years I'd fixed things for them, not one of them had ever asked if I needed anything fixed in return. Not once. I posted a picture of the mess to my private Instagram story. Nothing dramatic, just the water, the torn-up cabinet. Caption, "Some days are just leaks on leaks." No one replied. Not Ava, not Mom, not anyone. I stared at that silence for a long time, and for the first time, it felt louder than the noise I'd been drowning in. Because it's one thing to give without expecting anything back, but it's another to realize no one was ever planning to give in the first place. That was when the loneliness shifted. It stopped being quiet and started becoming a question. If I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone notice? And if they did, would it only be because the bills stopped getting paid? I stopped going to birthdays first. At first it was subtle. A work trip, a deadline, a polite decline with a nice bottle of wine shipped in my place. They never asked why I couldn't make it, just said got it or nothing at all. When I stopped offering explanations, they didn't notice that either. Then came Thanksgiving. The year before, I spent 2 days cooking. I brought a sweet potato casserole, homemade rolls, and a turkey I brined myself. Nobody mentioned the food. Ava showed up with 2 store-bought pies and Mom raved about them for an hour. The next year, I told them I had plans. I didn't. I made soup, watched old movies in fuzzy socks, and cried into my couch pillows for reasons I couldn't quite name. Christmas followed the same pattern. I mailed gifts, thoughtful ones too, books I knew they'd love, subscriptions I'd prepaid for the whole year. I got a text back from Ava that just said, "Thanks, sis," with a sparkle emoji. That was the year they stopped putting my name on the group family card, the one with everyone's faces arranged like some wholesome sitcom cast. I wasn't even in the background, just gone. I didn't confront anyone. What would I say? Hey, just wondering why I'm being erased? It would have sounded dramatic, or worse, needy. So I did what I always did. I carried the weight alone and told myself it didn't matter, that family dynamics change, that they were just busy, that maybe I had pulled away too much. But the truth was simpler. I was vanishing from their lives, and nobody was reaching out to pull me back. The only time my phone lit up with their names was when something went wrong. Hey Claire, do you know a plumber? Do you mind helping Mom with her taxes? Can you watch Sadie while we're in Cabo? It got to a point where I started keeping my phone on silent, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to keep being the one who always picked up. Even when I did show up, I felt like a ghost. There was a family barbecue last summer. Ava's friends were there, along with Mason's cousins, who all knew each other somehow. I sat at the far end of the table next to an empty chair and made small talk with a teenager scrolling through TikTok. No one asked about work. No one asked about my life. At one point, someone joked, "Claire's the mysterious one," and everyone laughed like it was a compliment. But it wasn't mystery. It was distance. It was neglect wearing a polite face. Later that night, as I was leaving, I overheard my mother saying, "Claire's always been a little reserved, but at least she shows up." She meant it as a kindness, I think, but it landed like a final nail. Showing up had become my only value. Not who I was, not what I felt, just my presence, my ability to fill space without requiring anything in return. And that realization sank into me like wet cement, that I had trained my family not to see me, by being agreeable, by avoiding conflict, by pretending it didn't bother me when I was overlooked, forgotten, dismissed. They didn't know I was fading because I had never asked them to keep me close, so I started asking myself questions I'd avoided for years. What would happen if I stopped showing up? Would anyone notice the empty chair? Or would they just shift the seating chart and move on? There's a strange kind of silence that settles in when your phone stops ringing, not because you turned it off, but because no one's calling. At first it felt peaceful. I'd wake up on Sunday mornings, make coffee, sit on my balcony with a book, and think, this is what rest feels like. But eventually, that quiet started to echo. It wasn't just the lack of noise, it was the absence of being missed. You know those movies where a character disappears and everyone starts searching, heartbroken and frantic? That's not real. In real life, people don't notice you're gone until they need something. And if they don't need you, well, your absence becomes a relief, not a loss. That's what happened with my family. Ava got engaged and didn't tell me. I found out from a mutual friend who assumed I was helping plan the bridal shower. When I texted Ava a simple "congrats," she replied 5 hours later with, "Thanks, super busy right now, but we'll catch up soon. XO." We never did. When the save the date card arrived 2 weeks later, it was addressed to Claire Halston without so much as a handwritten note inside. Just a printed card. Times New Roman. I felt like an afterthought in a bulk mailing. I stared at it for a long time, sitting alone on my couch, trying to decide whether I felt sad or just numb. Eventually, I tossed it in the drawer with old bills and expired coupons. That's how much it meant to me. That's how much I meant to them. Some nights I'd scroll through my own family's social media like I was watching strangers. Birthday dinners I wasn't invited to. Holiday brunches I hadn't even heard about. Ava once posted a throwback photo of the two of us from childhood with the caption, "So grateful for my tribe." I wasn't tagged. People commented, "You two are goals," and "such a beautiful bond." I wanted to scream. Instead, I just hit the little heart icon like everyone else, because even anger felt too intimate for what we'd become. It was around that time I started skipping therapy. I stopped seeing friends. I told myself I was just busy, but the truth was uglier. I didn't want to answer questions. I didn't want anyone looking too closely at the parts of me that felt hollow. Loneliness has a way of making you shrink inwards. You fold into yourself like a note no one ever reads. But the cruelest part wasn't that they ignored me. It was that I kept hoping they wouldn't. I kept waiting for a knock at the door, for a text that said, "Hey, I miss you." For Mom to call, not because she needed money or help with the Wi-Fi, but because she remembered I existed on a random Tuesday afternoon. It never came. And yet, I still showed up. To the events I was invited to the conversations where I had nothing to contribute but presence. I smiled through it all, laughed when appropriate, brought thoughtful gifts, because some part of me still believed that if I loved hard enough, they'd love me back the same way. But love doesn't work like that, at least not in families like mine. Love was currency. Love was leverage. Love was performance. And when you stopped performing, you stopped being loved. That's what broke me. Not all at once, but slowly, softly, like water wearing away stone. Until one day I realized I wasn't standing on a foundation. I was standing in a crater. And that was when the question changed. Not, will they ever see me? But why do I keep waiting for people who've already let me go? I remember the day I got the promotion. It was a Monday, cold and gray, the kind of day that usually blends into the rest. But that morning, I opened my email and there it was. Claire Halston, VP of Operations. My hands actually shook when I clicked the message. I'd worked 10 years for this, stayed late, took the worst shifts, cleaned up messes I didn't cause, and finally someone noticed. I sat at my desk and cried. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears rolling down my cheeks as I stared at my name in bold letters. I thought, this means something, not just for me but for how they'd see me, my family. That night I called Mom. She didn't pick up, but I left a voicemail. "Hey, just wanted to share something good. I got promoted, VP level, thought you'd want to know." No response. The next morning, Ava texted me. "Mom says congrats. Also, can you help her figure out how to move her 401k? I read the message 3 times, hoping I'd missed a second line. Something personal, something warm. But no, just a transaction sandwiched between silence and a favor. Still, I told myself not to make it a big deal. Maybe she was distracted. Maybe Ava didn't tell her right. I was still clinging to maybe. Then came the announcement. Ava and Mason were getting married in June. It would be a small wedding, close friends and family only, but I was assured I'd be on the list. Mason even sent me a text himself. "Hope you'll be there. Ava really wants this day to be special." So did I. For weeks, I quietly helped. I recommended a florist, sent over sample playlists, booked a call with a designer I knew from work to help with venue lighting. I didn't push, didn't insert myself. I just offered little things that might help. Ava rarely responded, but I figured she was overwhelmed. I even bought a dress. A navy blue sheath, elegant but simple. It felt like the kind of thing someone wears when she's trying not to stand out, but still wants to be seen. The night before the wedding, I double-checked the location, printed out directions, wrapped the gift I'd chosen, a first edition book of poetry that Ava loved in high school. I added a card, handwritten. To my sister, may this new chapter be everything you dreamed of. With love, Claire. I arrived 15 minutes early. The venue was beautiful, white tents glowing in golden light. Laughter drifted through the air, soft and polished like music from another room. I walked up to the check-in table, gave my name. The woman flipped through the list, her brows knit together. "Halston, Claire? I'm sorry, I don't see you here." I smiled politely. "There must be a mistake. I'm the bride's sister." She hesitated, glancing at her clipboard again. "I'm really sorry. It's family only tonight." I felt my pulse tick up. The air around me grew heavier. I turned, searching the crowd, and spotted Mom a few feet away, sipping champagne with one of her friends. I walked toward her. She saw me, lowered her glass, and offered a small, tight smile. "You weren't invited, Claire." I blinked. "I'm her sister." She shrugged, her expression flat. Ava didn't want drama. She needed a calm, joyful night, not a distraction. I opened my mouth. then closed it again. I could feel something rising in my chest, but it wasn't anger. It was clarity. Years of effort, all of it, reduced to this moment. This cold, curt dismissal. I looked at her, then back at the glowing tent, the polished laughter, the perfectly staged happiness. Then I turned back to the check-in table. "Don't worry," I said. "I won't stay where I'm not wanted." The staff member looked like she didn't know what to say. I smiled gently. "Good luck tonight," and I walked away. Down the gravel path, past cars with bows on their mirrors, holding a gift for a bride who'd already erased me from her story. I didn't cry. Not yet. That would come later. What came first was a quiet voice in my mind I hadn't heard in years. This isn't home anymore. I didn't drive home right away. I sat in the car with the engine running, watching the sky shift from soft gold to deep blue. The tent lights behind me glowed brighter as the sun dipped below the trees. I imagined the toasts beginning, the clinking glasses, Ava laughing in that delicate way she does when people are watching. I sat there for a long time, hands in my lap, dress perfectly pressed. A gift on the passenger seat that would never be opened. There were no tears. Not yet. Just a strange kind of stillness. Like standing in the middle of a room where everything familiar has been packed up and carted away. Eventually, I turned off the engine and drove home in silence. When I opened the door to my apartment, I didn't take off my heels. I just walked through the hallway, past the kitchen, into the dark living room. The city lights spilled through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. I dropped my purse. Then I sat down. Not on the couch, just on the rug. Dress pooled around me. Hands folded neatly in my lap like I was waiting for something. I didn't cry that night. Because there wasn't any grief left. Only recognition. This was it. The quiet end to a role I had auditioned for my whole life. The role of the reliable one. The helper. The emotional safety net. The invisible sibling who paid for things and didn't make scenes. Who was always useful, never central. I had played the part so well they stopped seeing me as a person. And I let them. That was the hardest truth. I'd told myself for years that I was being mature, being strong, doing the right thing. But really I had been bargaining. Trying to earn what should have never required a transaction. I thought if I kept showing up, kept giving more, they'd finally let me belong. But I was never in the photo. Not really. Just out of frame, holding the camera, paying for the catering. And that night, something shifted. Not in anger, not in rebellion, in resolve. I stood up, walked to my bedroom, took off the navy dress, carefully unzipped and folded it over a chair. Then I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, logged into my online banking, clicked through account after account. There they were. The standing transfers I had set up over the years, rent payments for my mom's apartment, a weekly grocery stipend for Ava, auto payments for Uncle Rick's prescriptions. I stared at them. Then I clicked cancel, one by one. Each click felt like a breath I hadn't let myself take in years. Then I pulled up the account I used to cover emergency expenses. I had funded it quietly for a decade. Just in case someone needed something fast, furnace repairs, car trouble, bail once for a cousin who never thanked me. I renamed it, not Family Fund anymore. Now it said, Claire, Restoration. I sat back in my chair. There were no fireworks, no dramatic music, just the soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room and the weight of something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. It didn't look like I thought it would. It wasn't a plane ticket or a big speech or a dramatic goodbye. It was silence. But this time, it was mine. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, sat by the window, watched the sky brighten over a city that had never asked me to be anyone but myself, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't wonder what they were doing. I didn't check Ava's stories, I didn't open Mom's messages, I didn't think about whether someone would call. They wouldn't. And that was okay. Because I was done waiting to be seen by people who had already decided not to look. The silence didn't last long. By noon the next day, my phone lit up with the first message. It was from Ava. "Hey, weird question, did you cancel the grocery card?" An hour later, another from Mom. "Bank says your payment didn't go through. Did something happen? Let me know." And then Uncle Rick, in all caps. "Claire, I got a pharmacy alert. Please fix whatever's wrong." I didn't respond. Not right away. Not because I was trying to be cruel, but because I needed to sit with the discomfort of doing something for myself, for once, without rushing to make it easier for everyone else. That night, Mom called. I stared at her name flashing on the screen, let it ring until it stopped. She called again and again. Finally, I picked up. Her voice was sharp, controlled. "Claire, what is going on? Your transfers have all stopped. I had to borrow from Ava just to pay the electric." I leaned back in my chair, watching the city lights outside my window. "I'm no longer covering family expenses," I said calmly. There was a pause, then a short laugh, dry and disbelieving. "Excuse me?" "I'm done," I said. "With the payments, with being the backup plan, with being treated like a bank that never charges interest." "Claire, don't be ridiculous." "I'm not," I replied. "I've been thinking about this for a long time." "You're punishing us," she snapped, "over a misunderstanding at Ava's wedding? This is childish." There it was, the shift, the quick pivot from confusion to guilt to insult. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't ask why I left the wedding. She didn't even pretend to wonder how I'd felt standing at the edge of my sister's life, unwelcome. Instead, I became the villain, the selfish one, the one who made everything harder by refusing to keep giving. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said, quieter now. "I'm just stopping." Another long pause. "Well," she said finally, "I hope you can live with the consequences of this." Then she hung up. I set the phone down and breathed in the silence she left behind. It wasn't peaceful. Not yet. But it was honest. In the days that followed, the messages kept coming. Ava sent long paragraphs filled with emotional landmines, how hard things had been, how much she had counted on me, how disappointed she was that I couldn't rise above the drama. Uncle Rick told me I was letting the whole family down, that Dad would have been ashamed. That one hurt. Not because I believed it, but because for years I had kept going by pretending he'd be proud. I answered none of them, but I read every word. Then I started deleting, not out of spite, but because I realized I didn't have to hold on to their disappointment like it was something sacred. It wasn't my job to carry the weight of their disapproval anymore. I wasn't angry. I was just finished. There's a power in detachment that no apology can manufacture, a clarity that comes when you stop asking people to see you differently and simply walk away from the version they've decided you are. They wanted me quiet, agreeable, endlessly generous. Instead, I became unavailable. Not just financially, emotionally, spiritually, energetically. They could think what they wanted, twist the story however they needed to make themselves the victims. But the truth? The truth was simple. I stopped answering because they stopped deserving the access, and that decision, calm, unapologetic, final, was the beginning of something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. Not the kind built by locking the doors, but the kind that comes from unlocking your own life. It started with a text. "Can we talk, just us? Ava." It came a week after the wedding, after the calls, the accusations, the long, guilt-laced silences. I stared at the message for a while, trying to decide what version of her I was about to meet. The charming sister who could make anyone laugh? The manipulator who twisted truths until you doubted your own memory? Still, I agreed. Not because I wanted closure, because I wanted clarity. We met at a little cafe halfway between her condo and my apartment. Neutral ground. Ava was already seated when I arrived, dressed like someone who read magazines about wellness and never finished the articles. Light scarf, oversized sunglasses, barely there makeup. She stood and gave me an awkward half-hug. "I'm glad you came," she said, sitting back down before I'd even touched my chair. I ordered a coffee, black. She ordered a chai latte and 2 lemon bars, for old times' sake. There were no old times, not like that. But I let it go. She started talking quickly. Apologies first, like she was checking boxes. "I know the wedding thing was bad. I didn't realize how hurt you were until Mom told me." I said nothing, just stirred my coffee. She continued. "It wasn't personal, Claire. I just needed the day to be drama-free, and you were acting kind of distant, you know? Mom thought it might be better if—" I held up a hand. "Stop," I said softly. "If this is just going to be an explanation that somehow makes my exclusion my fault, you can save it." Ava blinked. I'd never cut her off before, not like that. She regrouped quickly. No, I'm saying I'm sorry, truly, and I just want things to go back to how they were. You and me, working together." "Working together?" I echoed. She smiled, almost sweetly. "Well, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. Mason and I—" We've had a few financial hiccups since the wedding. Nothing huge, just some unexpected things with the house. I leaned back in my chair. What house? The one Mom and I told you about last year, the place over on Westbridge. We thought it made more sense for it to be in my name now that you're not really using it. My fingers curled around the edge of the cup. Excuse me? Ava hesitated, then pulled out her phone, scrolling to an email. I thought you knew. Mom filed the transfer paperwork with the notary already. She said you'd agreed. Or, well, that it was just a formality since the place is basically theirs anyway. A beat of silence passed, the clatter of a spoon on ceramic from another table. Somewhere a child laughed. I looked at Ava. Her face was unreadable. Either she truly believed this was normal, or she was counting on me being too tired to fight it. I never agreed to anything, I said slowly. She shifted. Come on, Claire. You know Mom's been living there for years, and Mason and I need a stable place. It's not like you're planning to move in. I couldn't help it. I laughed. It wasn't bitter or angry. It was sharp and clean, the kind of laugh that slices through decades of denial. That house is mine, I said, legally, entirely, paid for with my money, my credit, my name. Ava frowned. Why are you being so possessive? I'm being clear, I replied, for once. She looked away. Embarrassed, maybe. Maybe not. I stood up and slid a 20 across the table. Get your lemon bars, I said. Enjoy them. She didn't stop me, not even when I walked out the door without looking back. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt it again, that cold clarity, the kind that doesn't need validation or apology, the kind that finally, fully understands when a line has been crossed. And this time, I wouldn't just draw the line, I would enforce it. Her office was on the 10th floor of a quiet brick building in the downtown district. No flashy signage, no marble lobby, just a brass plaque on the door that read, Diana Yu, Attorney at Law. I'd looked her up 2 nights earlier, after a sleepless evening of staring at documents I didn't remember signing. The words unauthorized transfer request had kept circling my mind like a storm I could no longer ignore. I'd spent most of my life avoiding confrontation. Now I was walking into it willingly. Diana was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, silver-streaked, and so composed she made silence feel like a strength rather than a void. She didn't offer false warmth or a fake smile, just gestured for me to sit, opened a fresh notepad and said, Tell me. I started at the beginning, not my childhood, not the long road of being overlooked, just the facts, the house, the unauthorized documents, the shift in family dynamics, the recent betrayal. I didn't cry, I didn't rant. I just laid it all out like I was finally cleaning out a drawer that had been cluttered for years. Diana listened without interrupting. She took notes, occasionally nodded, but mostly, she let the silence carry the weight of my words. When I finished, she sat back, pen resting across her fingers. Well, she said, you're not crazy and you're not wrong. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She continued. What they did, if they attempted to transfer or alter the deed without your consent, is illegal. You have standing to reverse it and will take action to protect the property, but more importantly, you need to establish formal separation, legally, financially, on paper. I nodded. I don't want revenge, I said. I just want out, she repeated, clean and clear. She pulled a binder from the shelf behind her and opened to a blank form. We'll start by filing a title protection motion. Then we'll notify all parties through certified letters. I'll also help you draw up a formal cease and desist on any financial entanglements. It felt surreal. After years of tangled emotional loyalties, here I was, watching someone untie the knots with a ballpoint pen and firm language. For the first time, someone was in my corner and she didn't need me to explain why. Diana looked up from the form. You okay? I think so, I said. I've just never done this before. What? Protect your boundaries? No, I said, smiling a little. Be the one who walks away and locks the door behind her. She nodded. Well, Claire, it's about damn time. When I left her office, the sun was still high, but the air felt different, brighter, lighter. Not because the problem was solved, it wasn't, but because I finally stopped pretending it would fix itself. Later that evening, I opened my laptop and started sorting through old files, financial records, email threads, text message screenshots. I created a folder and labeled it simply, Unwinding. It wasn't about building a case. It was about reclaiming ownership, not just of the house or the money, but of my story, my voice, my time. I no longer needed to be agreeable to be worthy. I no longer needed to be quiet to be included. I no longer needed to give everything just to be tolerated. That chapter was done. And as I filed away the last document, I realized something. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. One with contracts and boundaries and maybe even court dates, but also one where I finally stood on solid ground. Mine. No one else's. It didn't happen all at once. At first it was just small cracks showing through the facade, a bounced check, a delayed payment, a polite but firm reminder from the bank. I heard about it the way I heard most things, through someone else. A former neighbor texted me out of the blue. "Hey, just saw your mom's place on the market. Everything okay?" I didn't respond right away. I sat there rereading the message, letting the words settle. I hadn't known. The house I bought, the one my mother had claimed as hers, the one she tried to pass to Ava, was up for sale. Quietly. Unceremoniously. Listed with blurry photos and a vague description. "Charming fixer-upper in established neighborhood." I called my lawyer. Diana confirmed it. They'd attempted a private listing before the title freeze was fully processed. Legally, it wouldn't go through. But the intent was clear. They'd planned to liquidate it. Cash out. Probably to cover wedding debt or cushion Ava's new life. And now, with that plan off the table, they were scrambling. 2 weeks later, I got another message. This time from Mason's sister, someone I barely knew. "Hey Claire, I know we've never really talked, but I just wanted to say, I think what your family's done to you is awful. Ava told everyone a different version, but honestly, people are seeing through it now." It was surreal, like watching a slow unraveling from behind soundproof glass. I wasn't in the middle of the drama anymore. I wasn't even a character in their retelling. I was just gone, and the absence was loud. From what I could piece together, things were falling apart. Brandon, my cousin who once asked me for a $4,000 loan just to get back on his feet, had filed for bankruptcy. Mom had taken on credit cards she couldn't keep up with, and Ava's joint account with Mason was frozen due to some unpaid contractor fees related to the wedding. I wasn't glad. I wasn't gloating. But I was watching, because for the first time I was finally seeing what happened when I wasn't the one filling in the cracks. People slipped. Not because they were cursed. Not because life was unfair. Because they'd built their lives around the expectation that I'd always be there. And now that I wasn't, the foundation was shaking. I ran into Uncle Rick at the grocery store one afternoon. He looked thinner, more tired than I remembered. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We miss you, kid," he said, reaching for a loaf of bread. I nodded. "I'm still around." He paused, then asked softly, "You think this is all punishment?" I shook my head. "No, it's a correction." He didn't say anything after that, just nodded again and walked away, cart rattling down the aisle. There was no apology, but for once there wasn't a request either. I left the store with nothing but almond milk and a strange sense of peace. It's funny what happens when you remove yourself from a role that was never yours to begin with. The world keeps spinning, people keep talking. But eventually, the noise fades. And in its place, there's space, room to breathe, room to decide who you are without the weight of who everyone else decided you should be. That was the real shift, not the legal action, not the financial unraveling, but the realization that I no longer needed to carry their consequences just to feel connected. I was connected to myself now, and that was enough. At first, it was whispers. A few mutual friends stopped liking my posts. One unfollowed me completely. I overheard a colleague at work, someone I'd once lent my lunch break to help prep for a presentation, say to another, "I heard Claire cut off her whole family. Cold as ice." That one stung. Not because it was true, but because it was the version they'd been told. The curated narrative passed along like gossip at a dinner table. She abandoned them. She thinks she's better than everyone. She left her mother struggling. The irony, of course, was that no one ever whispered when I was the one paying rent for 3 households. No one talked about me when I spent sleepless nights researching treatment options, or when I called contractors on lunch breaks to get the plumbing fixed at Mom's place. There were no whispers when I disappeared into their needs, only when I reappeared for myself. It was easier for people to believe I'd changed than to ask why I had to. There were moments it almost broke me. The quiet judgment in a neighbor's glance. The comment under a post I made about boundaries. Family is forever. Hope you remember that before it's too late. But I didn't reply, because I wasn't here to defend a story they were never part of. And not all the responses were cruel. One day, I got a card in the mail. No return address. Just my name in loopy handwriting. Inside was a note. Short, simple. I saw how your family treated you at Ava's wedding. I just want you to know I noticed, and I think you're brave. I stared at the card for a long time, not because I didn't know who sent it, but because someone finally said what I'd been too afraid to admit to myself. That courage doesn't always look like standing up. Sometimes it looks like walking away. Later that week, an old college friend messaged me. Hey, I've been following bits of what's going on. I just want you to know, I stopped talking to my brother 3 years ago. Similar reasons. You're not alone. It wasn't much, just a sentence. But it chipped away at the lie I'd carried for years, that cutting off toxic family makes you heartless, that walking away from people who birthed you is unnatural, that silence is abandonment. Sometimes silence is survival. Sometimes it's the only way to stop bleeding. Eventually, more quiet support came. A coworker left a sticky note on my desk. I admire your strength. A distant cousin sent me a DM. I always thought they used you. I just never knew what to say. I didn't need a parade, but I won't pretend those moments didn't matter. They did, because they reminded me I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the years of imbalance, that there were people, maybe not many but enough, who saw through the performance and recognized the cost. And more importantly, they reminded me that I wasn't invisible anymore, not because I shouted louder, but because I stopped disappearing for the comfort of others. I still get looks, still get the occasional passive-aggressive comment, still hear secondhand whispers about what she did. But now, I let them pass through me like wind through an open window. Because when you've lived your life being misread, misunderstood, and misused, you learn that clarity isn't something people hand you. It's something you build, quietly, brick by brick, until one day you're standing inside a home made entirely of your own truth. And you realize you don't need the old house anymore. You've already moved on. I didn't recognize the sound at first. It was my own laughter. I was sitting in a ceramics class on a Tuesday evening, my hands covered in clay, listening to a retired high school teacher tell a story about her cat knocking over a whole shelf of pots. It wasn't even that funny, but something about the way she told it cracked me open just a little. I laughed, loudly, freely, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't look around to see if it made anyone uncomfortable. No one needed anything from me in that room. No one expected me to fix their bills, their feelings, or their future. I was just a woman with cold fingers and a misshapen bowl, trying something new because she finally had the time to wonder what she liked. Turns out, I like making things with my hands. Things no one needs, no one depends on. Just things that exist because I wanted to create them. That freedom started showing up in other places too. I took a weekend trip to Cannon Beach. I booked a small cabin, packed 3 books I'd been meaning to read for years, and left my phone on silent for 2 full days. I walked barefoot in the sand. I watched the tide roll in without checking the clock. I cried watching the sunset, not because I was sad, but because I didn't feel rushed. Back home, I started gardening on my balcony. Just herbs at first, then tomatoes, then wildflowers that didn't always bloom but still made me smile. I stopped keeping spreadsheets for other people. I started journaling again. I sent a handwritten card to my old college professor just to say thank you. I had space. Not just in my schedule, in my mind, in my body, in the way I carried myself through the world. People noticed. My coworkers said I looked lighter. A neighbor commented on how peaceful I seemed. Even my barista at the corner coffee shop smiled and said, "You've got a good energy about you." I used to think healing had to look like breakthroughs and big declarations, but really it looked like small, quiet choices that stacked on top of each other until one day you realized you were living differently. I wasn't chasing peace anymore. I was living in it. Not perfectly. Not always. But enough. Enough to feel the difference. Enough to choose myself again and again in rooms where I used to disappear. Enough to know that solitude isn't the same thing as loneliness. Sometimes it's exactly where you come home to. Some people think peace is quiet, but I've learned it's not always about silence. Sometimes peace sounds like your own breath when you realize you don't owe anyone an explanation. Sometimes it sounds like your name not being mentioned in a room full of people you no longer need approval from. Sometimes it's the absence of being needed for anything but simply being yourself. That was where I had arrived, not with a triumphant finale, no movie montage, no last-minute reconciliation, just a series of mornings where I woke up and felt steady. There was a moment, just a few weeks ago, that caught me off guard. I was at the grocery store picking out lemons when I heard someone call my name. It was Ruth, my mother's friend, the kind who always wore matching scarves and somehow knew everyone's birthday. She walked over slowly, like she wasn't sure if I'd stop or keep walking. "I just wanted to say," she began, "I admire what you did." I blinked. She didn't mean the job promotion. She didn't mean the house. She meant walking away. She touched my arm gently. "Your mother's having a tough time, but that's not your fault. I think deep down she knows it too. She just doesn't know what to do without you." I nodded. "Neither did I said. She smiled. "Well, you're figuring it out." And I was. Not just how to live without the role I'd played for so long, but how to trust that I didn't need to audition anymore. I didn't need to be useful to be loved. I didn't need to be agreeable to be welcome. I didn't need to make sense to everyone in order to be at peace with myself. I was finally enough. Not because someone said so, but because I'd stopped asking. That night I sat by my window with a cup of tea, the city lights blinking in the distance. No one was calling, no one was asking for anything, and for once the quiet wasn't empty. It was full of new memories, of small joys, of space I had made for myself by clearing out what no longer fit. I thought about my mother, about Ava, about the dozens of tiny moments that had once held so much weight, and I let them float. Not because I didn't care anymore, but because I finally knew the difference between carrying something and being owned by it. I still keep that first edition poetry book I bought for Ava, not out of bitterness, but because it reminds me of who I used to be, the woman who gave beautiful things hoping to be seen. Now, I buy beautiful things because I like having them around, for me, and that's enough. Healing didn't make me louder. It made me truer, more honest with my time, more intentional with my words, more deliberate with my love. And in all of that, I discovered something I never expected. I wasn't empty after all. I'd just been full of everyone else. Now there's room for me. I started with the hall closet. Not because it was messy, but because it was where I kept the boxes. The ones labeled with years instead of contents. The ones I hadn't touched since I moved in. Inside were things I'd nearly forgotten. Birthday cards with my name misspelled, old photos from family vacations where I was half-cropped, notebooks from college filled with schedules and expense logs, always tracking, always planning, always trying to stay ahead of someone else's chaos. I sat on the floor with one box open, the afternoon sun cutting a soft line across the carpet. The air smelled faintly of dust and lavender. I pulled out a stack of letters from Ava, written back when we were teenagers before life got complicated. One of them said, "You're the only one who gets me." I held it for a long time. Then I put it in the keep pile. Not because it made me sad, but because it reminded me that there was a time when love wasn't laced with obligation. I moved through the rest more quickly. A postcard from Mom's trip to California signed with just her name, receipts from medical bills I'd covered, a to-do list I had written for someone else's emergency. Most of it went into the shredder, not out of spite, but because I no longer needed physical proof of how much I'd given. My life had already kept the record, my body had already felt the weight. Letting go wasn't dramatic, it was methodical, quiet, freeing in ways I hadn't expected. I boxed up what I wanted to keep. Not much. Just enough to honor the person I had been without dragging her behind me. That night, I lit a candle and sat in my newly emptied living room. It felt bigger somehow. Not because of the space, but because I was finally filling it with intention. There was no sadness, only a gentle kind of closing. I didn't need to burn bridges or rewrite history. I just needed to step into the next room of my life and shut the door behind me. And that door, for the first time in years, didn't creak when it closed. It came in the form of an email. Subject line, "Can we talk?" It was from Ava. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, rereading the message without clicking it open. The subject alone told me everything I needed to know. Not "I'm sorry." Not "thank you." Just a question that sounded more like a request to reset the clock. Eventually, I opened it. She wrote about how hard things had been lately, how the wedding debt had spiraled, how Mason was under pressure, and how Mom was really struggling emotionally. She said she regretted how things went, that she missed our bond, that family should come before pride. Not once did she mention the house. Not once did she acknowledge the way she had tried to erase me. But near the end, there it was, a sentence that stood out in bold relief. I know things got messy, but I just want us to go back to how we were. I closed the laptop. Back to how we were? She meant when I stayed quiet. When I paid and never asked for receipts. When I swallowed every slight because being useful was the only way to be included. No, that version of me was gone. Not angry, not vengeful, just done. A few days later, I ran into Mason. He was alone at the coffee shop near my building. He looked tired, worn out in a way that money problems and poor decisions tend to wear on a person. He spotted me before I could duck away. "Claire?" he said, standing up awkwardly. "Hey," I nodded. He gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I didn't sit, but I stayed. He launched into a speech, half apology, half defense. "We never meant for things to get so complicated," he said. "I think your mom was just trying to keep the family together. Ava, too. They didn't mean to hurt you." I tilted my head. "But they did," I said. He looked at the table. "I know. I guess I just thought you could handle it. You always handled everything." There it was, the truth under all the words. They had counted on me being unshakable, because being strong meant I wouldn't say no, wouldn't leave, wouldn't change. But I had. "I'm not angry," I told him. "But I'm not going backward either." He nodded slowly like he understood, or maybe just accepted it. Before I left, he looked up one last time. "She misses you, you know." "I'm sure she does," I said. "But missing someone doesn't mean you deserve them back." That evening I wrote Ava a reply. It was short, measured, kind even. I told her I wished her well, that I hoped she and Mason figured things out, that I'd found peace and I hoped she would too. But I didn't say I forgave her, because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a performance. It doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes it's just a clean ending. I didn't need Ava's apology to close the chapter. She needed to offer it to reopen it. And that wasn't happening. Closure, it turns out, doesn't always come with a bow. Sometimes it's just you, standing in the doorway of your own life, choosing not to invite certain people back in. Not out of bitterness, but out of respect for the woman you've finally become. She came to my door on a Thursday afternoon. No warning, no call. Just the sound of knuckles against wood and a silence so still, I almost didn't open it. But I did. She stood there, small and tired in a beige coat that didn't quite fit. Her eyes were rimmed with fatigue, her hands holding a plastic container of something homemade. I recognized the lemon bars. She used to make them when Ava had a bad day. "Hi, Claire," she said. I nodded. "Hi, Mom." We stood there for a beat too long, the weight of all the things we hadn't said hanging between us. She glanced down, then held the container out. "I thought maybe we could talk." I didn't move to take it. Instead, I stepped aside. She walked in like someone visiting a museum, careful, distant, as if unsure what she was allowed to touch. She sat at the edge of my sofa while I remained standing, arms crossed loosely, heart steady. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, "about everything." I waited. "I know I wasn't fair to you. I leaned on you too much, took you for granted. I see that now." Her voice was calm, but her eyes searched mine for an opening, for softness, for something familiar. I didn't offer it. Instead, I asked, "Why now?" She hesitated. "Because it's quieter without you." That made me pause. It was honest, probably the most honest thing she'd said in years. She looked down at the lemon bars still on her lap. "I miss having you around." I nodded. "But you miss what I did, what I gave, not who I am." She didn't argue. "I'm not angry," I said. "But I can't go back to being the daughter who makes everything okay so no one else has to try." "I'm not asking you to." "You are," I replied gently, "by showing up with dessert like we can just pick up where we left off." She looked down. Her hands tightened around the container. "I don't want to hurt you," she said. "I know, but you did." She swallowed hard. Then she stood. "I guess I should go." I walked her to the door. As she stepped into the hallway, she turned one last time. If I call sometime, would you answer? Maybe, I said, but not if you need something, only if you want to know who I actually am. She nodded, her expression unreadable. Then she left. I closed the door behind her and exhaled slowly. No tears, no collapse, just a steady breath and a quiet knowing. This was what a boundary felt like, not a wall but a doorway, and I had finally learned how to lock it without losing the key. My apartment feels different now, not because I changed the furniture or painted the walls, but because I no longer come home carrying weight that doesn't belong to me. It's in the way I move, slower, softer, like someone who finally stopped holding her breath. I spend my mornings in silence. No phone calls, no emails from people asking for favors disguised as updates. Just sunlight on the kitchen tile and the sound of water boiling for tea. I've started cooking again. Not just scrambled eggs or something microwaved between deadlines. Real food, measured, stirred, seasoned the way I like it. I light a candle, I sit at the table, I eat without rushing. It's nothing dramatic, no grand transformation, but it's mine. I've taken up hiking on weekends. There's a trail just outside the city that winds through tall evergreens and ends at a bluff overlooking the valley. The first time I stood there alone, hands in my pockets, wind brushing against my skin like a quiet reminder, I thought, so this is what space feels like. I didn't check my phone. I didn't think about what I was missing, because I wasn't missing anything. I was present. I even joined a local book club. Not because I needed to be social, but because I wanted to talk about something other than disappointment and duty. We meet once a month in the back of a small bookstore with mismatched chairs and hot cider in chipped mugs. I sit with strangers who don't know my history and don't expect anything from me but a conversation about characters who exist on paper. It's freeing to be known for nothing but who I choose to be now. Not the girl who always showed up, not the woman who always fixed things, just Claire. And for the first time in my life, that's enough. Sometimes I wonder if this peace will last, if I'll wake up one day and feel the urge to go back, to re-engage, to re-explain. But the urge never comes. Because when you build a life on your own terms, you stop needing permission to stay in it. And mine? It's finally beginning. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I caught myself smiling for no reason. I was sitting at my desk, sunlight pouring through the window, a cup of tea warm in my hands. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel unbearable, but now it just felt honest. I looked around at the space I'd created, the books on the shelves, the painting I bought on impulse from a street artist in Portland, the calendar with empty weekends I didn't feel guilty about. There was no noise, no pressure, no one needing me to explain why I was doing less or giving less or choosing myself more. Just me. And for the first time, I didn't feel empty. I felt full of moments I'd reclaimed, of silence I'd grown to love, of choices I made without permission, of the strange, gentle joy that comes when you finally stop measuring your life against the needs of others. For years, they said I was cold, distant, guarded. What they meant was that I wasn't available the way they expected me to be. And now, I wasn't. I was present for my own life. I sat there for a long time, watching the light move across the floor, and thought about all the things I used to chase. Approval, belonging, recognition. The promise that if I did enough, gave enough, tolerated enough, I would finally be seen. But the truth is, I had always been here. I just needed to look in the right direction. It's not that the hurt disappeared. It didn't. Some wounds leave echoes. Some absences don't fade, but they no longer define me. They shaped me. Then they set me free. And now, when I walk into a room, I don't wonder if I'm wanted. I wonder if I want to stay. That's the difference. That's the freedom. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I used to think walking away meant failure. That if I just tried harder, loved better, gave more, they would finally see me. That somehow my value was waiting to be unlocked by someone else's approval. But now I know better. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and even for them, is to stop showing up for the role they've written for you, especially when that role cost you your peace, your dignity, your sense of self. You are allowed to change the story. You are allowed to stop performing. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself they prefer and become the one you were always meant to be. And if you're sitting there wondering if choosing yourself makes you selfish, I want you to hear this clearly. It doesn't. It makes you honest. It makes you whole. It makes you free. So if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the one holding everything together while quietly falling apart, this is your permission to rest, to walk away, to start over. Not out of bitterness, but out of love. For yourself. Because healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like clarity. Boundaries. A quiet evening in your own home, knowing no one will call expecting you to save them. And that's more than enough. If this story spoke to something inside you, I'd love for you to share it. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Share your story, your boundary, your brave moment, your first step toward freedom. And if no one's told you this today, you are not selfish, you are not alone, and you deserve to take up space in your own life. Now breathe and begin.